Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about sensation perception, and Meyer's textbook talks about it mixes it all into one. So they'll do a little perception in two modules, and then it gets to sensation, and it comes back to perception. The more difficult concepts to look at with this deal with the perception. And the end game of this is in psychology. So why are we talking about how we feel sensations, or we smell things, or our vision processes? How does our brain process things, right? So that's not typically what you see in psychology, is it? Or that you think of? You don't typically think of it. When you think of psychology in terms of perception, what do you think of? You remember? Or do you have any idea? How you perceive situations, right? Does this person like me? Are they looking at me funny? You know, how do you perceive interpersonal relationships? How do you perceive, say, what the government is saying? How do you perceive the elections? How do you perceive your spouse or your children, etc.? That's where we really talk about in psychology, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't you think? Well, that's the end game. That's when we get down towards the more complex, integrated concepts. When we get to personality, they're going to talk about different types of personalities have these perceptions of themselves, like my self-concept, right? Or when we talk about, abnormal, some people learn to see the world in certain ways, right? And so that's the more complex idea when we talk about psychology and perception. But in order to really understand how all these mechanisms work in that end game, you got to get to the building blocks and know the pieces that make up our perception. And this is this is going to be basically cognitive aspects to perception. How does our brain organize the world? This is going to talk about brain mechanisms in how we transfer energy into a neural impulse. Okay? So at this level, this is like the minimal building blocks to hopefully understand a little bit more of the more complex perceptual personality and behavioral aspects, etc., etc. So this is kind of a bio unit. All right, this is the last bio unit, and it's pretty easy in terms of what we're discussing. But I just wanted to preface it. That's what this is all about. Not how do we perceive ourselves. That's the end game. The first part is going to be more of the building blocks. What is the role of experience in perception? Now that's going to come back later too, isn't it? If you have low self-esteem and you perceive yourself as in negative ways, that's based on your experience, isn't it? When we see lights flashing, or we see, like we're driving on the freeway or on the highway when it's in the desert, we perceive water out there, right? You ever see that? On the horizon, we perceive like wavy lines in water, etc. That's going to relate to perception. How do we perceive depth? Right? That's going to relate to experience, right? What is the role of culture? Some cultural behaviors remember the end game? They're going to have different perceptions of what is right and appropriate behavior. How does the mind make meaning of stimuli from the environment? How does the mind process your visual stimuli into making meaning to the shapes that we see? That's a big piece of it. That's the building blocks. Perception is defined as the process by which the brain organizes and interprets information. Information in the form of sensory input. So the brain automatically, which is a cognitive aspect, organizes and interprets. It's the process through which people actively use knowledge. So you incorporate experience and understanding of the world to interpret sensations. So imagine this, we usually do sensation first. We process the light energy into our retina, etc. And then the brain transforms that into meaning. And we use information to get an accurate understanding of the world. Do you understand what I mean by this? So a significant thing, a significant idea that we need to know is experience or knowledge helps us see the world accurately. There's a lot of variables that our brain automatically does this. We make sense of the visual stimuli because we process it. We assemble sensations into meaningful patterns. We automatically do this. It's based on our experience and evidence and input. So the first thing is an expectation. If you have no experience with something, right, you really don't know what to expect, do you? You're going to go, have you been on college interviews yet? Nobody? One person? So who's not been on a college interview? So the word interview, you have an expectation, right? Because you all know what an interview is, okay? So you have an expectation of what's going to happen at that interview. What's going to happen at the interview?
They're going to ask you questions and find out about you.
There's going to be some stranger who has power over you, don't they?
Yes.
They can either let you in or not. And they are going to evaluate you. And you are going to be nervous, and you're not really going to know what they're going to ask you. But you do have some expectation based on other examples. How you perceive that, again, that's the end game, is going to be based on your experience, isn't it? How you've seen it on TV, how well you feel you answer the questions. You're going to have some indication whether you're doing good or problematic, right? That's part of your experience and your knowledge about that topic, right? So we build expectations based on our previous experience. Expectancy is the concept. Expectancy. Why? Through our knowledge or experience. All right? So, in order to perceive the world accurately, we're going to integrate our experience, our knowledge, with whatever the sensations are. Does that make sense? So we have our experience and our knowledge, and then we're going to have reality here. Get it? Based on our sensory understanding, what input we get. Okay, that's a fundamental piece of this perception. We integrate our knowledge into new situations, and we understand those situations based on our previous experience. Yes? Yeah, that's great. You make a document. That's great. How do I erase? Yeah. A perceptual set is the concept. A perceptual set is a set of mental tendencies and assumptions that affects what we perceive. And what builds our perceptual set is our experience. We use context, the surrounding of an event or the stimuli. That creates an expectancy. We know if you're the context of an interview, you know the context of an interview. It's high stakes. It's going to make you nervous. There's going to be somebody there probably asking you questions, and they're going to evaluate you. So that's the context. That's also the expectancy. That's going to influence your perception. You're going to answer questions, and when you answer questions, you're going to say to yourself, yeah, I did a good job answering that question, right? And so that's going to, your perception of that example or that reality, you're going to be informed by your thoughts and your previous experience. With processing visual stimuli, and that's what this is mostly talking about. We use our occipital lobe, remember? You remember that? Mm-hmm. That's where the visual cortex is. It goes from the retina, which is in your eyeball. The cells respond. We get this thing called transduction, which we're going to talk about when we get to sensation. We see the edges and lines. Angles are automatically detected. Movement is detected. And these are called feature detectors. So this is these are the bio. These are processing. In the cortex, okay? Does that make sense? Are you with us on here? So our brain automatically does the processing for edges, lines, angles, and movement. Our brain is in tune. It's probably evolutionary. Our brain has developed over time to pay close attention to these things. You're with us? No. I know you're not with us, but that's all right. You're doing something else. Is it important? Okay. So this is going to be, for sure, major aspect of processing of information, which makes up your perceptions of reality. Okay? So our brain automatically does these processing with these this would be, basically these are the sensory receptors, the sensory information that you're collecting. Is once we collect the energy and transform it, then the brain does this automatically. You with us so far? Okay. We call those feature detectors. Your brain, looks for these things. We have this concept of parallel processing. Basically, it's a really easy concept. We see it in a number of different examples. The parallel processing basically tells us that there is parallel things going on. So multiple levels of processing all at once. So, and this is a really good example here. We've got color, we've got motion, we've got form, and we've got depth all at once. You follow? So what makes it parallel? This is the kind of like the number of processes going on. Multiple processes are ongoing to make meaning of the world, to perceive the world accurately. You understand that concept? Any questions on that? So your brain is processing all of this stimuli from the environment automatically, immediately. And that's called parallel processing. Cool?
Wait, I have a question.
Yes.
So it's like processing everything like all at once?
Yes.
Oh,
So that means, so you're seeing a visual sensation, you're hearing, you're smelling, and even in just visual, you're processing all of these different things, the colors, the motion, the forms, the depth. That's just for vision, but there's multiple things going on.
okay.
And that's the concept of parallel processing. You dig?
Yeah.
Cool. All simultaneously. Our perceptual, now this is what you were reading about. Should be familiar from the reading, right? Some of this definitely was in there. Perceptual systems, basically, again, how are we processing the visual stimuli and the other stimuli that we are receiving? We automatically distinguish figure ground. You guys, anyone can give us an example of figure ground? You remember that from the reading? They didn't do a very good job of showing pictures of it. No? Where's my pictures? I should have some pictures in here. Here is figure ground. What do you see here? You see two faces. Or a vase.
Yeah.
Two vases, or no, wait, two faces or a vase. Vase. A vase, as Richard would say. He's pretentious. So, what makes up figure? The thing that you see up front. What makes up background is the background. You clear on that? So automatically, we interpret stimuli from our environment into foreground and background, figure and ground. If you see the vase is foreground. If you see the vase, the shadow is background. You get it? So that's called figure ground. Let's go back. I should have a picture here. That's called figure ground stimuli. We automatically, our brain processes it to look for that. Figure ground. We try to group stimuli. If there is if they look for patterns, we automatically try to process it. We look for proximity, things that are similar and close together. We look for similarity, things that look alike. We look for continuity, things that continue a line. We try to close the form. If I was to draw this picture, and I'll show you examples of all these, but you just got to know, basically our perceptual system automatically organizes information in this way. Our brain processes it in this way. So for example, if I was to do this, what would you think is next? A triangle. Get it? Your brain already said, oh, I've seen these patterns before, and this is what it should be. Get it? Or let's see if I could... I can't do it. No, I can't do it because I'm not good at this. It's a Freudian, never mind. Okay. You'll show you the picture. Multiple senses, stimuli that occurred at the same time is synchrony. The time appeared to belong together. We can do it in multiple senses. Common region, location, boundary, and connectedness. Basically, these are all principles of our perceptual processing. We automatically do these things. We put things together. We sort the world in this way. Our brain does it automatically. What impacts it? What helps us do this? Was the first opening. What helps us understand this automatically?
Perception.
Experience, knowledge. Experience and knowledge basically helps us understand these things automatically. So the brain has a tendency to do it, but it doesn't do it by itself. You have to integrate a little bit of experience, and then the brain, boom, naturally does it. Does that make sense? You perceive things more accurately with more experience. Your brain, so it's a nature-nurture concept, isn't it? It's a nature-nurture concept. The nature is your brain has a tendency to do this. The nurture is you have experience that really, oh, that's really what is happening. So let's see if we can give you examples for all of these. These are also called perceptual system, but also called constancies. We need experience, must be familiar. That's for depth perception. In order to judge the size of something, we have the capacity to see depth, right? Automatically, nature. But in order to accurately judge it, we need some experience with it. So when we think of depth perception, that's going to be both nature-nurture components. Size constancy, basically, that's experience, isn't it? Do you know that, for example, we have this is George Washington, remember? Now, on a video, we can make George Washington seem giant, can't we? But is he giant? If you already know he is a small statuette, right? No matter, if you already know that information, then no matter how you perceive it, you're going to know it's still the same size.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand that? That's what the size constancy relates to. That we learn from experience that even though it appears to be giant, our experience tells us the more accurate perception of reality is that it's changing. Basically, its image is being shifted on our retina differently. Okay. So we have perceptual constancy, size constancy, shape constancy. We know that things hold their form. Alcohol impairs our shape constancy, probably our size constancy. But in a normal functioning brain, you have the capacity to judge those things. What helps us judge these things is our experience, okay? Does that integrate that concept for you? Nature, nurture, and experience related to how we process stimuli. Okay, I think that's important. Brightness constancy. Brightness of an object appears to be the same if the surrounding objects are illuminated. Wonderful. We already talked about the figure ground. One fun fact here, this is another topic that you already saw this in the reading, hopefully, is this right here. Ambiguous stimuli. So if you understand the concept, you'll be able to explain how this is related to ambiguous stimuli. Hello.
Mr. Richard wants to know if you have any plastic cups. Because we're having a party.
To give to the class. I have one if you want. No, I don't have one for your class.
Okay. And he asked if you want to come grab anything from the
Is there food? Pause it.